When will AMD break the 10 billion US dollar in revenue on a quarterly basis? My suspicion is that it's gonna be either Q3 this year or Q4 of this year. And that's gonna bring with it a whole lot of earnings per share. In fact, if you look at this graph here, the four colored bars are the revenue segments from embedded, gaming, client, and data center. And the gray one is the gap earnings per share. And you can see the number is according to the scale on the right side. And I expect AMD to multiple times increase their number of earnings per share in Q3 and Q4. Maybe I'm a little bit optimistic. Let's say that Q3 comes in at $1 per share in earnings per share and Q2 comes in at 1.5. That's still a run rate of $5 earnings per share already by end of this year. And there is no sign that AI GPU spending is slowing down. And also other segments for AMD, for example, the embedded is probably gonna have a much stronger end of this year and even stronger 2026. Their gaming has been quite bad over the past 4 quarters. We saw a slight rebound in the previous Q4, but the gaming revenue could potentially go back to the numbers of 2023 where they had like 1.5 to 2 billion on a quarterly basis. So it could easily double or triple from here. So at least 2 of the other segments other than data center is probably gonna have a much stronger 12 months ahead than they had 12 months in the past 12 months or 18 months. And also the client segment, the laptop CPUs, the laptop APUs, for the likes of Dell and Lenovo. We also learned that Dell recently starting to talk a little bit more with AMD, whereas previously they have been a big Intel partner, you could argue. So it's gonna be a quite interesting time ahead for all the other segments. So combining all of this, I wouldn't be surprised at all if they average 10 billion US dollar per quarter in 2026. Now, in this other graph, you can also see the total revenue for AMD as well as divided data center revenue in AI GPU, which is represented in the blue bars, and the server CPUs, general purpose server CPUs, which is seen in the red numbers. And you can see the explosive growth in Q4 of 2023 onwards. Back then, Lisa Su, the CEO, mentioned that this was the fastest ramping AMD chip ever in their history. And they essentially ramped this chip up in 1 year's time frame to 5 billion. And I don't expect that the second generation MI350X is gonna be any slower. In fact, I do believe that it's much more suited for AI workloads, both inferencing and training. Remember that MI300, the first gen, which was launched in late 2023, is essentially a mix of high performance computing and AI workload kind of chip. It's not like razor sharp focused on AI, likes of let's say NVIDIA's H100, H200 and Blackwell. Whereas the second gen for AMD is much more focused on AI workloads. And I believe that if MI300 ramped to 5 billion in the first year in revenue, I do expect that MI350X will at the bare minimum do 50% more, most likely closer to 2 times more. Now that's gonna be launching, in the second half of the year. So maybe the combined sales is still gonna be around 5-6 billion. So it's gonna be, because again, we are not selling MI350X at the current stage. It's gonna be like at the end of the summer probably. So when you look at all of this and looking at also that, don't forget the red bars there. The EPYC revenue is continuing to grow, with a couple of 100 million or at least 150 million on a quarter. So by end of next year, the EPYC revenue could be 2.5-3 billion per quarter. That's 10 billion yearly run rate only for EPYC and probably 20-25 billion for Instinct sales. AMD's data center revenue in 2026 could be easily 25-30 billion, which is more than the entire company sales any other year previously in their history. So I do believe that the market is missing a gigantic opportunity here. I mean, look at my numbers again. Let's go back to this other chart, right? Look at the earnings per share expectations for Q3 and Q4. And let's say that I'm way too optimistic there. Let's say they come in Q3 at 1.2 and in Q4 at 1.5. Again, that's around $2.5 on those two combined quarters. But that is based on, 3, 4, 5, 6 months from now. A year from now, in mid of 2026, we could easily see AMD having a 15 billion quarter in Q3 or Q4. The earnings per share in late next year could easily be, 2.5 to maybe 3 or even $4 per quarter. And if you, let's say, meet somewhere in the middle there, let's say we go with, I don't know, let's say we go with $3 on average for 2026, that's essentially 10 to 12 earnings per share for the entire of 2026. And the current stock price sitting at 85. Sure, they recently mentioned they're gonna raise, if the stockholders agree to that, like 5 to 10% of dilution, but that's not gonna do a whole lot in my opinion. If you look at just like how fast they're gonna grow their earnings per share. So I would say that AMD, I mean, if my numbers are correct, they could easily be a 250 or $300 company by end of next year, especially if the market is rebounding and the interest rates go down and all these headaches about tariffs kind of slow down a little bit. I mean, I'm not joking. I mean, by now you should have known me that I'm quite conservative compared to maybe a few other YouTubers. But if these numbers are correct, they could easily do a 200, $250 company by end of next year, and probably 300 even. And again, the Oracle deal, 30,000 GPUs on a single company, right? We know that Meta and Microsoft are big AMD customers. And then once in a while you see also this kind of stuff like TensorWave at a meeting which is called Beyond CUDA, which is NVIDIA's strong software stack around AI data centers. You can see that the CEO Alex Masharov of Higgsfield AI shared with Anushan Elangovan from AMD that they cut cost of 40% and boosted speed by 25% only by using AMD's MI300X compared to other competitors, which is obviously NVIDIA. And imagine what MI350 will do and MI400 will do. And looking at some of numbers just on how much better MI350 potentially is for AMD, that number you can see that I've put in row 11 and row 12 here. Let's zoom in a little bit. You can see that MI50 has higher memory capacity, essentially 60-70% higher memory capacity than MI300 at 288 versus 192. We can also see that it's made on a better node, TSMC 3N, compared to TSMC, let's say, 5 nanometer. We also see that it's much more suited for FP8, so matrix multiplication with lower precision. The same way that NVIDIA continues, with the lower and lower precision, which means that you can do more calculations, although with a little bit less precision, but you don't need that much of precision in AI calculations. So they're matching NVIDIA's, Blackwell at, 4600 FP8 tops, same way that NVIDIA's Blackwell does. Even in FP4, they're very, very similar. Whereas, you could argue that MI300 was not as competitive in AI workloads, especially in training, compared to the current NVIDIA, what NVIDIA could offer at the market at the time. So when you look at all of this, and also looking at, again, all these talks in the background from AMD that how they're going to become a more software company, that's, they're focusing on ROCm, they're expanded their software team by 2 or 3x, I believe 3x in the past 18 months. They purchased one of the best European companies in terms of large language models. AMD purchased Silo AI last year. So no matter how you look at this is a opportunity of a lifetime in my opinion. AMD is so well positioned now, and again, don't sleep on the other segments. Look at the client segment, right? Look at row 5 here and look at where they were. Let's go to early 2022. They were having 2 billion or so US dollar in client revenue, but that was during the insane peaks of COVID, where everyone was buying laptops. Whereas if you go to, let's say, Q1 of 2023, they were back down to 700 or so million revenue on a quarterly basis on the laptop APUs, CPUs, essentially the client segment. And I believe that number is much more representative for what AMD traditionally was supposed to have in that market. But now look at Q4 of last year, right? Q4 of 2024, 2.3 billion, which is their best ever, right? But this number is much more sustainable than what the 2.1 billion was in 2022. That's because AMD has a much stronger position in the market compared to Intel right now. So this thing is also potentially by end of next year they could easily do like 3.5 billion on client revenue on a quarterly basis. Gaming segment could easily jump up to 2.5 billion, as we get closer to PlayStation 6, by end of 2026, and next generation gaming GPUs. And we can already see that in the mid-range, AMD is very competitive with NVIDIA in the gaming GPUs. So no matter where you look at it, AMD is like going for it. They're like razor focused. So I do genuinely believe that. I keep like hammering on this. I don't know when the market will stop going down due to all these like the discussions about tariffs, but this is like great time to look at AMD stock in my opinion. So anyways, thanks for your time. Please like and subscribe and comment in the comment section if you believe that AMD is potentially can go to multiple hundreds US dollar in the stock price in 12-18 months from now. And see you in the next one.